Homunculi, this story begins with them. Creatures that were born thanks to the ancient technologies of transmutation of living creatures accidentally found 500 years ago. Homunculi created by mixing various kinds of rare substances are born with incredible abilities that go beyond imagination. They are strong, fast, and due to the lack of boundaries of life, they do not die easily, unless, of course, someone kills them. People called homunculi knights symbols of war and sent them to the battlefield. For homunculi with such a powerful force, such a thing was in the order of things. The highest representatives of this race, who have the rank of S and are called gods of war, could single-handedly cope with an entire state. And the lower homunculi creatures of rank E were able to overcome about 100 people. Without knights or with low-ranking knights, even a power with a large army was ultimately doomed to perish. And with the appropriate number and rank of knights available in it, the defense capability of one country could be considered truly royal. In order to improve the knights and get the best materials, the great powers, consumed by madness, seized the weaker states. The kingdom of Avantes has become one of these powers. Its ruler could not stand the shame pressing on him as a result, which led him to a chair with a noose. Following the father, the son committed and after that, the subjects, enraged by the tragedy, plunged into grief. Princess Hens, who occupied the empty throne, was different from the former king and heir. Instead of giving into despair, she decided to retaliate. Still under endless threat from homunculi and great powers, several scientists were looking at a new homunculus in a flask. It was necessary to start activation commanded by one man to another. Homunculi, paradoxical as it may sound, have become the only hope of the Avantes kingdom. A secret elixir, the production of which is impossible without God's protection. Dragon Heart, which contains the most powerful mana. The introduction of the elixir and the dragon's heart into a flask with a homunculus began. However, knights were not completely perfect creatures, they also had their disadvantages. The man was completing the launch of Rittergood, and it turned out, one of the men fell to his knees. In his thoughts was a successfully completed plan that took 300 years. Finally, this plan was implemented. The next step was to check the rank and name, an immutable rule. The man who had previously fallen to his knees had already risen again and was thinking about the rank. What kind of rank he would be. Even B rank would be enough. It was the only way he thought they could get out of the clutches of the tribulation that enveloped their kingdom. A name appeared on the screen, Sid. Characteristics are determined from birth. Name, Sid. Rank, F. They will never be freed from this oppression. The man could not believe his eyes, rank F. They put in so much effort. It was some kind of mistake. This could not happen. Sid the rank F homunculus was struggling along with a huge something that looked like a slurry of rocks and dirt and had a mouth on its stomach. It ran at Sid and attacked him. He dodged and ordered this fat man not to approach because he was too miserable. Homunculi cannot surpass predefined characteristics. However, the young man, homunculus, managed to do it. Sitting astride the guys, everyone around wondered what Sid was doing. He quarreled with the one who was under him, because he called the young man defective, and he did not like it. Spitting in the young man's face, the guy asked him to disappear. Such garbage. Why did he turn up his nose at all? The young man attacked the guy with his fists, shouting that he was not a scum. But the knight stopped him in time, asking a question about what Sid was doing. The guy under the Sid screamed. Sir Solid was in front of him. Sid asked the knight not to interfere, because they had not finished the conversation yet. Solid grinned and lifted the young man by one hand, who, in his opinion, conducted conversations with the help of fists. The guy who was under the Sid looked at the knight with fear. Solid decided to find out what his name was. He jumped up from the ground and replied that he was Kumas. He was in Sir Forrest's Ginger Infantry Regiment. The knight looked at Kumas and threatened him that if such a situation happened again, he would tear off his limbs himself. Kumas got scared and ran away apologetically. After releasing Sid Solid, he began to tell him that despite the fact that he did not shine in rank, he was not in a position to participate in any fights. The young man immediately asked not to lecture him and get down to business. Solid sighed and told Sid that he had been assigned a task. Ordered to participate in the raid on Cloud Ridge. Ordered to participate in the raid on Cloud Ridge. Sid was asked to think well, because the mission was not easy. If he agrees, he will not get away. Sid agreed. Solid asked the young man not to rush to a decision. He did not know enough about the world yet. Sid also asked Solid not to climb, because he wanted to sort everything out himself. Solid grabbed the guy and asked him if the young man really imagined how dangerous it was on the ridge. It was a forbidden zone. Why would a homunculus take such a risk? They were quarreling in the middle of the square and attracted people's attention. Therefore, Solid suggested that Sid move. There were too many eyes and ears here. and they entered the house. Sid invited the knight to sit on a chair, since he was only one, and he himself was going to stand. Solid told the young man that, after all, he was also a knight. He had to tell him if something was needed. Sid offered to return to the conversation. The knight told the young man that he lacked the necessary knowledge. The opportunity will not be just now. The trip can be postponed for later. The homunculus began to talk about the defective, garbage and garbage. These were all his nicknames, which his people not only clicked on the local kingdom, but also others. And recently the guy found out that someone even considers him the main reason why their kingdom was doomed. Did the knight know what the young man's life was like? He asked if the young man knew how dangerous it was on Cloud Ridge. It wasn't the ridge that was the danger zone, but this place where he lived. Therefore, he wanted to prove, no, he was simply obliged to prove to everyone that he was not defective at all. Cloud Ridge, a refuge of monsters, a forbidden land, a raid on which even strong knights threw. Speaking of the scale of the ridge, it's about 5 times the size of the Avante's kingdom. In other divisions, the commander has at least the rank D. In the first one there was a B1 knight spoke to another. Perhaps this commander-in-chief has been heard of. He is a knight of Spur, who arrived from Gregos, the only survivor of the punitive squad that penetrated the territory of the ridge 100 years ago. It was him. He leads the first division. Why did the knights of this division come across some kind of sucker with an F rank? The soldiers did not understand. Looking at Sid, after commanding stop, one of the soldiers got scared and started asking for forgiveness. In the noise of the foliage, someone could be heard approaching. It was Karak. Sid's commander was asked to give the order to attack, but the young man stood rooted to the spot and looked at Kark. The knight took over the command without shouting to the commander, who froze in fear. The musketeers were given the command to prepare to fire, aiming at the monster. Altogether, fire. The division shot at the monster and thought it worked, but it seems they only angered him more. And then the monster began to attack. Sid sat terrified on the ground and couldn't move. He had to save his comrades. He had to prove himself. Forcing himself to move, he took the hilt of the sword. It was a living hell. Everyone had to run. The vice commander shouted to others not to dare to make their feet, but the knights ran away in horror. Someone asked for help while being held captive by a monster. It was too painful for the hostage. The vice commander tried to save his comrade, but then Sid intervened, freeing the young man. The vice commander tried to reach his comrade. Fortunately, he was alive, and the two of them were looking towards the battle of the monster and Sid. Sid was fighting a monster. He could win. He could defeat the monster as well as the others, and without saying anything to himself, his sword was broken, and he himself was lying under the paw of the Kark. No, it couldn't have ended like this. And then something pierced the monster. Some knight used a weapon on the monster and then disappeared. Approaching the young man, he introduced himself as a thief from Gregos, asking in response who this young man was in front of him. The homunculus had all those nicknames in his head that they called him, and he began to introduce himself like a defective garbage, which the thief stopped the young man, because he did not understand what he was talking about now. If he was alive, he had to get up. The guy woke up, and a thief was sitting next to him. The thief gave the young man first aid until he woke up. It was difficult for Sid to move, and the knight suggested that the young man wait with his movements and lie back on the ground, where he had been lying before. Did Sid ask Spur what happened? The thief told the young man that after the discovery of their squad, his squad destroyed the Kark. All the survivors were cured, so now they are resting. The homunculus was interested in how many of his soldiers were left alive. Those who escaped had no chance, the knight replied, so it wasn't even necessary to count. The vice commander was standing guard and another knight offered to replace him. The old man was asking about the soup, and then suddenly he heard something in the bushes. It looks like something was coming, but then the old man turned around and did not see his partner, and asked him not to joke at night. And then something attacked him. The knights were sitting next to each other, and the thief asked the young man if he understood correctly that the young man was a Sid from Avantes. The knight introduced himself once again and was glad, thank God, that the guy was alive. The guy asked him in his own words, to which the knight replied that he was certainly glad, because Sid was too young to die in such a place, especially because of such a disgusting order. The young man did not understand what the thief meant and asked him again, to which the knight said that it was obvious. Everyone said that it was because of politics, abilities, or for the sake of the safety of subjects, but in fact they were simply thrown out. Sid was very surprised, and Spur was surprised that the young man did not know about it. Then their conversation was interrupted. Someone was shouting to shoot. Someone was calling for help. The thief apologized to the young man and now asked him to move a little. Their camp was attacked. They were Chargas, and there were a lot of them. They began to advance. Spur fought with other knights, and his comrades asked him to defend himself instead of counting the number of monsters. Then a big Chargas ran into Sid, and he deftly fought him off. Sid didn't understand why he didn't feel the monsters, and before his eyes, he saw the creature grab the vice commander. Sid started to attack, but the thief stopped him. He asked the young man what he wanted to do. Did he really want to put other soldiers in danger? Sid was about to start objecting, but Spur interrupted him. That's what the monsters needed. At such a pace as the battle was going on now, there will only be more corpses. When it gets light, the Chargas give up and leave. We must hold out until dawn, simultaneously protecting the remaining people. The vice commander in whose back the monster's fangs were stuck woke up and tearfully begged for help. He was looking right at Sid and begging him. As Spur said, the Chargas retreated at dawn. Sid, Spur and the rest of the knights survived. But then he remembered how he himself desperately asked for help. But no one answered his pleas. He asked the commander, but he simply replied that Sid was a homunculus and in the end why he was standing still, why he was such a weakling. The thief finally shouted to Sid, asking if he was okay, but tears were streaming down Sid's cheeks, and he wanted to say something to the thief, but only replied that everything was fine. The Chargas are called the Black Panthers of the Cloud Ridge. If they hide their presence, it is difficult to predict their attack. The thief asked the young man not to despair, because in that situation he could not do anything. Sid couldn't understand why he felt helpless anyway. But then the knight was distracted, because here even breathing could not be properly translated. The thief turned away from Sid and asked the guy to listen to him carefully. When the battle began, the young man had to run away with the soldiers in the opposite direction. He won't be able to buy much time, but Sid will be able to leave this place in time. The young man did not understand what the knight was talking about. But then all the soldiers rushed to run, and a new monster appeared in front of them. Sid was already beginning to be afraid, but the thief ordered him not to show fear. This monster was called the Volcador. He was the one who stole his arm. The knight didn't know that the monster was still alive. Sid shouted to the thief that he couldn't leave him and run. Although he was scared, with trembling hands holding a sword, he stood behind the knight. He asked the young man, did he really think that he would be able to defeat this creature? If Sid didn't want to die, he should have done as Spur said and left with the others. The young man did not understand why it was necessary to rush into a losing battle, because the knight could also die. 100 years ago, during a raid on the Cloud Ridge, 6 knights and more than 800 soldiers died from the paws of the Volcador. The thief began his story. He barely managed to survive, though he had to say goodbye to his left hand in that fight. However, today the battle had to be completed, either stolen or this monster. The monster charged, and the knight came at him, and started attacking the monster. But his attempts were unsuccessful, and the monster grabbed the knight by his weapon, and then himself, intending to eat him. Sid watched in horror, thinking that the knight was finished, but the knight was able to jump out of the clutches of the monster, having previously pierced him. Everything was fair, because before that the monster had snatched off the thief's whole arm. Sid stood aside and did not understand why his body did not move, why this was happening to him again. After all, he was also a knight, and his comrade fought alone. Then the monster went on the attack again and hit the thief, and so quickly that the knight did not calculate it and was wounded, flying through a tree. This was not in his plans, he thought to himself, lying on the ground. A monster loomed over him, not giving the thief a break even for a couple of seconds. Volcador picked up the knight again and began to bring it to his mouth. The thief had already begun to say goodbye to life, but then Sid pierced the monster with a sword and the thief fell out of the hands of the Volcador. The young man was interested in whether the whole was stolen. He'll try to buy some time. The knight in anger informed the guy that he told him to run. But Sid didn't want that and couldn't listen to the knight. Spur asked Sid to obey him before it was too late. But Sid was also a knight, and even if he did not become a hero who saved his comrade, at least he would not abandon him to his fate. Only in this way, upon his return, the young man will have the opportunity to hear well done in his address. Then the monster grabbed him, took him off his back and threw him to the ground, wanting to trample the young man with his foot. The thief came to the rescue, grabbing the monster by the leg and stopping him. Spur asked Sid to get together and listen carefully to what he would tell him now. There was a spear lying on the side, and at the signal of the thief, Sid had to stick it into the mouth of this creature. The young man was worried about his friend and his wound, but he asked him not to think about him, because there was no time for that now. There was only one chance, and the knight believed in our hero. Therefore, he should not have disappointed Spur and run faster for the spear. Grabbing a spear, and the thief at this time managed to hit the monster in the leg, and then let a blow right into his mouth on his stomach. He hit the thief in response that he flew away. At that moment, when the monster fell, Sid had to stick a spear into it at the knight's command. And running away, he jumped on the monster and swung well with all his strength. He pierced the Volkadar. Immediately running up to his friend, who was very ill, he took his head and asked him to come to his senses, not to leave him alone. Stoll, lying on his knees and looking at the young man, thanked him, because Sid did a great job. The young man, unable to hold back his tears, wept 6 looking at his comrade, who still continued to praise him. Gray goes, someone's hand is holding someone's throat, and this person cannot understand what is wrong with his opponent. A woman's look makes it clear that a man should know why everything happened like that, and everything happened because of one case. The man repented that it was not his fault, but it was too late, the life was leaving his body. The girl, after she finished with Philan, talked aloud about how noisy he was even before his death. And feeling someone's presence, she asked not to hide anymore and show herself. It was Shadow. He greeted his mistress Annihilator. It was quite unexpected that her subordinate was looking for her, maybe something happened. And he began to report on the night. Spira, was the lady aware of this? Did she specify which one was from Gragos? Everything was right, it was such a thing that he died, a subordinate told her. Trembling with anger, she asked again, was the thief really dead? Shello confirmed his words, and the girl asked to open the gate. He prepared everything for Mrs. Annihilator. She, in turn, ordered to tell the details later, and now she is leaving, but finally allowed the subordinate to call himself by name. Shadow understood, his mistress Neil. Cloud Ridge. Sid held Spur on his lap and remembered what he had told him. Spur had a request to Sid, and for the young man his words sounded like deathbed. The knight asked Sid to survive at all costs, stay alive and find his adopted daughter. Her name was Saren and she was in the capital of Gragos. The thief decided to rely on the young man and informed him about it, and that was it. The young man was afraid that it would be difficult for him to fulfill his request, because he was too weak to survive, and apologized to him. Then he saw the golden snow, but it was not snow, but a huge screen that appeared in front of the young man. He reported that all the conditions were met. The young man did not understand what it was. A connection is made to the Akashic records. Information opens. Rank recognition is performed. The rank is low. Information access is open only up to the 10th rank. Connection, rank, a tiered system. Activation of the Akasha driver. Start of the level system. The level has been raised. The system reported that the level was raised. Did Sid want to distribute points? Everything was heaving inside him. He didn't understand what was going on here, but he felt the power filling him. Then screens flew around him, and the young man saw some text. The text on the screen was as follows: information, name, Sid, level 2, rank, F, nickname, defective. It was as if he had been fined, the young man thought. Next screen, stats, vitality, 1002 over 1002, offensive strength, 120-150, defensive strength, 87, fame, terrible, stamina, 7. Another screen wrote that the young man received 2 points to strength, the remaining points were equal to 5. He could distribute them and no skills were found. If all this did not seem to him, perhaps by touching with the tip of his finger something that should not be touched, Sid realized he had found his talent. A week later, Sid runs as fast as he can with heavy shortness of breath. Behind him is a monster that is trying to attack. Sid is trying to fight back. He can't pull the cart yet, the young man thinks. If he had known this would happen, he would have trained his agility yesterday. The Kark attacks the young man and he dodges, and then makes a lunge, after which he receives a blow from the monster and flies away. Lying on the ground, the knight thinks that he cannot die like this, because he has just found a way to become stronger. As he prepares to die, he hears a female voice, who clearly did not expect to meet a knight here. And after these words, the Kark falls to his knees in front of him, and a girl is sitting on his back, holding his mane. She defeated the monster with one hand. Mrs. Annihilator wondered if the last surviving knight from the punitive squad was in front of her and where he stole it now. And the young man led her to the grave, showing that the thief was here. She couldn't believe her eyes. Was the knight really dead? Asking the young man if he had made a grave for the thief, she thanked him for it, because the thief was her only friend. Since the young man had buried her comrade, he had the right to receive gratitude from her, and from that moment on she would consider Sid her friend. Sid was very surprised that the girl called him a friend. She also explained that the friend of the thief was her friend. The girl introduced herself as the Annihilator Keeper of Gragos. Her name is Neil. Extending her hand to Sid, she was glad to meet him. Sid was confused, and the girl did not understand what she had told him wrong. The young man assured that it was not because of her, she just called him a friend, and he could not save her friend. On the contrary, he considered himself a burden, so consider him a friend and we will not finish. Neil replied that she was sure that the guy was a friend for the thief, because she knew him. The young man shook Niall's hand and together they sat down by a tree. She was interested in something, and she asked the young man how he survived. Only he wanted to tell her how they were attacked. It was Druck. The girl asked to wait for the young man, because she would deal with it in a couple of minutes. But the young man stopped her. He wanted to deal with it himself. He already had the experience to show it. Neil asked in surprise, what did Sid want to show her? The young man replied that she had just asked a question about how he survived and he was going to tell her and show her. By raising the characteristics. That was his answer. The girl did not understand him, but it was too late. Sid rushed into battle. Sid was fighting with Druck when he suddenly wounded a young man by the eye. The girl was very worried about the guy. Sid was thinking that without raising the force, he could die. The guy was lucky and he won. Neil didn't understand why he suddenly, because everything is fine. The guy was standing with a sword at his chest and then suddenly sunlight fell on him. The girl looked at him in surprise while his wounds began to heal by themselves. Sid explained to her that if he had been the same, the fight would have ended after the first scratch. But thanks to the fact that he sent 7 points to the force, he managed to cope with Druck. Neil, looking at the young man, did not understand what he was talking about at all. Sid explained to her again that the text had begun to appear in front of his eyes since he first raised his level. Text? What kind of text was in front of his eyes? Neil asked him uncomprehendingly, and the young man opened the screen. Obviously, the girl didn't see him, but it was written on the screen that all the necessary conditions were met, and the level was raised. Did the young man want to distribute his points again? The knight told the girl that if he kept his eyes closed a little and then opened them, a translucent screen with text on it would pop up in the air. First there was power. All the characteristics that were reflected on the screen were the same as yesterday. Vitality was 1002 over 1002, offensive power was 120 150th, defensive power 87, glory -10, strength 14. Only one power has changed, rising by only 5 points. The young man stopped feeling tired. Even when he was burying soldiers who died in different zones, his body became stronger. He began to see the text after the murder of Volcador. The young man thought that the level would start to rise if he instinctively dealt with monsters, so he did not stop hunting, until a window appeared in front of him again, on which it was known that he had received 5 stamina points. Then came endurance. From 7 she went up to 12. The life force that was originally 1002 turned into 1052. The girl interrupted the guy's story, thinking that he was mocking her. The young man asked her uncomprehendingly, physical and mental growth is impossible for a knight. This applies to absolutely all homunculi, starting with those that were born 500 years ago. Neil told the young man, no matter how much he trains, he will not be able to become faster and stronger. And he wanted her to believe that his strength had increased and his stamina had supposedly improved. The Sword of Radiance, the young man said and asked if that was the name of her weapon. Neil, falling to the ground, did not believe how the young man knew this. Sid replied that the screen told him and that he wasn't lying to her, it was true. He could really improve himself. Neil stood silently in front of him and thought to herself that if Sid really wasn't lying to her, then his talent wouldn't stop at growth alone. A huge number of opportunities now opened up before the young man. Their value could be limitless depending on how he used them. Perhaps even her skills couldn't match his. Walking together through the forest, the girl hit a tree and a fruit fell on her. She immediately gave it to Sid. And did she clarify with him that he needed so-called opt glasses for growth? Sid answered positively. Neil understood that it was not about a simple experience. Sid replied that there would be no more experience from absolutely any kind of activity. Otherwise he would have raised this experience so many times. The young man was sure that the experience was directly related to the fight. However, the level did not increase after each successful hunt. Neil didn't understand in what sense. The young man explained to her that when he killed one Volcador, the level rose immediately. But in the case of Druck's, it took as many as 15 creatures to finish off. Neil was thinking that there are a lot of weak ones, but few strong ones, and asked Sid a question about what if the level was raised only when hunting monsters of the Lord rank. Sid replied that then the received ability would not be of any use. He would not have had the strength to cope with such a monster. In this case, it was only necessary to surrender. After these words, he received a slap in the face from Neil. She asked the young man never to say those words again. If, in order to become stronger, it is necessary to deal with a monster of the Lord rank, then the young man will do so, said Neil, after his slap, even if there was a risk of death. The young man was surprised, and Neil told him that she was interested in his strength and she invited him to reveal the secret of his strength together. She will become his assistant. After these words, a screen appeared in front of Sid. It was written on the screen, "A team has been formed with an Annihilator, a Knight of S rank. A penalty is imposed on obtaining experience points." The team. Neil looked at the guy in surprise, and he informed her that he saw a new text on the screen. It is written that they formed a team. The team. Neil was surprised. Did they really write this in Sid's windows? The girl asked Sid if he knew exactly how many monsters he needed to kill to increase his level. The young man did not know the answer to this question. Even if there was a way to check it, he had no idea what to do. Then Neil offered to hunt a few creatures. Maybe they'll find out something. Neil was standing against a monster that started attacking her. She immediately defeated him in response by making a lunge and invited Sid to finish off the monster. The young man obediently agreed. The screen appeared and Neil immediately asked what was there, to which Sid just shook his head. In what sense? Neil did not understand, because the young man said that his level increases after hunting monsters. Here the screen showed that Sid, due to the strong difference in rank, receives a penalty. The minimum number of experience points was obtained. He told her to say that, but their ranks were too far from each other, so a fine was imposed. The fine? Neil asked again. The young man said that it was written on the screen that he received the minimum number of points. Neil asked if Sid knew exactly how much he got. The young man had no answer to this question. Sid thought to himself that this way of growth would not suit him, and he suggested that Neil finish for today. The girl asked the young man if he was exhausted, that he wanted to finish everything, to which the young man replied that he was fine. And then Neil interrupted him with a suggestion that he was probably worried about her. She was surprised. Sid apologized. He understood everything, that she was stronger. But Neil replied that it would not be possible to finish yet. There was a monster ahead. This area was a Kark habitat. She asked Sid. And telling the guy to rest, she rushed into battle. Kark also went into battle for the girl. She attacked him by jumping on his head, and he tried to grab her in his palm. But the girl deftly dodged and attacked him from above. With the help of a glove and a stone, she sucked the power out of Kark and he became sand. So much for the Annihilator, Sid thought to himself. A supernatural being who calls himself a strategic weapon. So that's what an S-rank power is. Neil was walking towards the young man, and meanwhile a screen appeared in front of him, which showed that Sid's level had risen. He wondered why all of a sudden. Despite the fact that the monster was killed by Neil, Sid's level still increased. And then an idea came to her. She told Sid that she knew how to become stronger quickly. And how did the happy young man ask her? Before that, it seemed to Neil that the level rises only from a certain number of monsters killed. But if you look at the problem from the other side, whatever the number itself, you can just hunt until the level itself rises. Not enough of one creature, they will kill 10. And if that's not enough, we'll deal with even 100 or 1,000 monsters. Sid stared at the girl in shock. She offered to postpone the rest. The young man wondered where Niall was going and she demanded to follow her, because soon he would understand everything himself. They came to the Charga's habitat. Surrounded by them, they stood until they attacked them. Neil attacked several at once and Sid's level immediately rose. Apparently there was a result from this, but the young man felt that there was something wrong this time. The level has increased by more than one. Neil was surprised. The level increased by 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, the screen showed. 5 levels up. It exceeded Neil's expectations. The 7th habitat of the Chargas. It's time to start, Neil was saying. He and Sid will be hunting now, for the whole kingdom of Chargas. 3 days later, Neil attacked the Chargas. Sid was next to her and fought too. For 3 days they did not even close their eyes. Sid couldn't take it anymore. Neil was full of energy and reported that 3 days had passed, and they had only bypassed 7 zones. They needed to increase the pace. Sid was exhausted. What is the level now? Neil demanded. The level was 99th. Neil thought it was a good progress, and those necessary experience points for the young man were slowly being collected. Neil asked. The young man replied that it looked like that. Neil was thinking that maybe it was worth switching to stronger monsters, and she dragged Sid along with her. He just asked to kill him, tired to the point of horror. The habitat of Kharkov. There was a big Kark in front of the guys and Neil offered the young man to try alone. Sid was surprised. It was a training session and she was going to cover for him, so he shouldn't have died. He was already dying, Sid thought to himself. Neil offered the young man her sword and asked if he could borrow it. The young man was surprised and refused, because it was training, and her weapon is too good to train with him. And Sid went on the attack. Kark attacked the young man in response. Sid deftly dodged, and Neil watched the fight with surprise. Dodging Kark's blow, Sid attacked him head-on and his sword broke. Neil warned the young man about the attack, but he did not have time to dodge and got from Kark. Privately, Sid regretted that he had not agreed to the weapons that Neil had offered him earlier. Hearing a voice in the dark that asked him to open his eyes, he saw the Nile in front of him. She was apologizing for not intervening earlier in their fight. Did Sid ask what happened to the monster? Neil calmed him down, assuring him that she had turned the Kark into sand. The young man thought so, and then a screen appeared in front of him. Neil wondered what it was. The young man informed Neil that he had reached the 100th level. It was written on the screen that Sid had reached the 100th level. Now his rank has been upgraded to rank E. In connection with the satisfaction of the necessary conditions, access to information of the 9th rank is opened. Sid could learn skills, and he told Neil he was going to get some sleep. Neil looked at the sleeping Sid, and I wonder 6 how he could improve, read information about weapons, and now he has also acquired a wonderful power of regeneration. Even E-rank knights recover very well from various injuries, although Sid's injury was not so serious. However, even more amazing than his regeneration power. And she remembered how, after waking up after the fight, Sid told how he got the E-rank. Neil was very surprised. Sid said that the rank has risen and now he has become an E-rank knight. When reaching the 100th level, it turned out that the knight moves to a higher rank. Neil thought to herself. Sid said that every level increase, a young man is awarded points, which he can distribute among 5 characteristics. Sid transferred them to dexterity yesterday. Of course, there were no grandiose changes, but the difference was clearly visible. Sid also mentioned 2 points that are distributed automatically, but he still has unallocated points, so he can increase his prog. Without thinking through her thoughts, she was interrupted by Shadow's subordinate, who informed Neil that it was time for her to return. She answered him that there were still things to do, and she was not ready to return. Shadow understood and disappeared. The next day, Sid looked at his screen again. Neil asked the young man if he had finished distributing his points. Sid replied that he hadn't had time yet because too much had accumulated. Did the young man send Naya points in endurance, strength, and agility? Like Neil said earlier, Sid replied that he had sent the points to the characteristics. Talent and domination have left for now, because I couldn't understand what they meant. Neil stood and looked at him, thinking to herself that Sid had grown taller, voicing aloud that the difference is small, but he has grown noticeably. The young man was surprised. Neil asked the guy how he felt and did he feel any changes in himself. Sid, making boxing movements, told the girl that he would understand his condition after he moved. The girl threw him a sword, inviting Sid to attack her. He thought she was joking. Neil was serious, because despite the progress of the young man, he and she were still very different from each other. Would Sid be able to touch even the edge of her clothes? Neil asked. The young man took the sword and warned the Nile that it was coming, and he went on the attack. Neil deftly dodged his blows. It had faster speed and power, but even that wasn't enough, so the guy grabbed a snap from the Nile. His skills that improved did not mean that he became stronger, the girl informed him. Sid got angry and started attacking her, but Neil dodged again and at the same time taught him that if he wanted to achieve real strength. At that moment Sid was thinking about what he was kind of doing, but getting ready to strike, he found that Neil had disappeared. The girl was already behind him, and he didn't even notice it and got hit in the neck. It was necessary to use the force correctly. Neil saw that her strength was running out and thought that this seemed to be all that Sid was capable of. Of course, there are changes, but it's only been a week. Sid said about Neil that it was expected of her as a knight of the rank S. She was right. If the speed became higher, and the force became more powerful, this did not mean that she was generally stronger now. Neil was glad that the young man did not lose heart and did not break down. He's only gone up a few levels, and there's already such a difference. Will she be able to step over all the obstacles? If it increases the level, 100, no, 1,000 times. Sid continued to attack her. Neil, fighting off Sid, was simultaneously having a conversation about how if a young man relies on speed alone, then gaps appear. Then the young man attacked again, and Neil talked about strength and grabbed him, knocking him to the ground. The opponent will pity you with his techniques, Neil told Sid, looking at the young man lying on the ground. But his thoughts were not here and Neil noticed this and said that the young man somehow blushed sharply. Maybe he had something hurt. Sid began to deny that this was not the case and asked the girl to just get off him. Their training battle continued. Sid attacked, Neil dodged, demanding from him again and again. He attacked every time, and Neil thought to herself about the old Sid that he could not attack like that. However, we are talking only about the possibility of an attack. The attacks themselves are not distinguished by any special grace. I am glad at least that Sid's physical skills have generally grown. Thanks to this, Sid became stronger. Now Neil was ready to show him a clever trick. Neil said that she created this technique by imitation when she saw the abilities of one rank knight. She didn't really need it, but Sid would definitely need it, and she attacked him, showing this technique without harming the young man. It will be difficult to repeat immediately, but if you remember and practice this technique, then Sid will be able to simulate it. Sid, who was almost sitting in fear, shouted at Neil why she did this to him. Did she really want to kill the young man? Sid laughed and turned away and told Sid that today was the last day of their trip. Because she had some things to do, the girl postponed them as much as she could. But it was impossible to delay any longer. She was apologizing for not telling him about it earlier. Sid tried not to show that it both surprised and upset him. But he asked the girl not to worry about him, because everything was fine, because she couldn't do anything about the work. Besides, he reminded her that he had been alone from the very beginning. But thanks to her, he was able to make progress quickly. It was completely inconvenient for him to hold her further. Then Shadow appeared almost out of the ground and informed Neil that it was time for her to go. Sid looked at it all with surprise. Shadow opened the portal, and Sid wanted to ask Neil one last question. The thief informed him that he and their knights in general had been thrown out here like some kind of waste, and they could not resist orders after all. He started to say that he was interested, but Neil interrupted Sid and asked him to listen carefully to her. She told the young man that he is capable of anything and can become anyone. Perhaps his real gift is freedom of will. The guy said the name Neil, but she continued her speech, asking the young man to promise her that he will not give up until he gets to her level. What will develop further? Shadow, as if urging Mrs. Neil, was waiting for her at the portal. Neil lent Sid her sword and asked him to return it the next time they met. And she was hiding with her subordinate in the portal. A week later, our hero is running from monsters. After leaving the Nile, he did not rest for a day. He trained a new technique that Neil showed him. During the day, the young man had hunting, at night skill training. As a result, he achieved amazing results. If we take into account the unallocated points, there are not so many E-rank knights who are stronger than him. Sid wanted to register the skill, but no matter how much he tried, nothing worked. The screen showed in red that the young man had insufficient knowledge and skill. Skill registration was not available for him. In any case, not enough does not mean impossible, Sid thought, and therefore, continuing to practice, he believed that he could do anything. Then the monsters stopped chasing him and started howling. The young man couldn't believe his eyes. Was it an ambush? And there were a lot of red eyes looking at him everywhere. And then they went on the attack. The young man began to fight back and he successfully succeeded. But there were more and more of them. And Sid realized that he could not cope with so many alone. I had to get out, but how could I escape from everyone? Then someone's huge hand grabbed one of the monsters and all the others fled in horror. It was Volcador. How could he be here? Sid thought, because this was not his territory. And the Volcador threw the body at the feet of the young man. And after that, he attacked Sid. Sid prepared to fight back and attack, but he didn't have enough strength to cope with the Volcador. And he grabbed the young man. Volcador growled at the young man. And Sid thought only that now all his bones would be broken. What was he supposed to do? Then Neil's words sounded in his head about the fact that he relies on only one speed and remembered their fight, where she attacked him without a weapon and then taught him a new skill, a technique that can take over the force. And the young man begged himself that this technique would work, and applied it to the Volcador. And hitting the Volcador, he howled, and the guy prayed that he would succeed. Then a screen appeared in front of him, which said that the young man still did not have enough knowledge and skill. He was in a stupor. Meanwhile, Volcado grabbed the young man in both hands. Sid thought that he would finish him off at such a pace, and he had to come up with something. How did Sid get out of it? The Nile and training flashed through his head, then he gathered himself and attacked again. And again. The screen kept popping up in front of him. The young man was angry at him and tried again. After all, he made a promise to the Nile and attacked, once again escaping this time from the clutches of the Volcador. A screen appeared in front of him, which said that the new Crash skill had been activated. Rank B. That's what was meant by talent. Crash, Rank B is a homunculus skill. With the help of concentration of force at one point, it strikes the enemy with amazing power. The skill is influenced by the user's talent. The brighter the talent, the more skills you can master and the stronger they will be. The current number of skills available for registration, 0. And looking at the stricken Volcador, the young man ordered himself anew. The screen said that Sid had defeated Volcador alone. The number of points received exceeded the allowable. There is an adjustment based on the rank. Incredible level up. Does the young man want to distribute the points? His level has increased by 29, as evidenced by the phrase about incredible growth. The nickname Defective, which was so annoying to the eyes, disappeared. A new nickname on the screen, Lord of the Forests. Time passed, a middle-class monster that our hero was chasing. It has low defense capability and endurance, but compensates for these shortcomings with high speed and front paws blades. Lord of the Forest Sid. The Lord of the Forest is a nickname awarded to the one who won in a single fight against a monster of the highest class. If a monster, whose level is lower than the Overlord, collides with the owner of this nickname, he will fall into a state of fear, and his performance points will decrease. Thanks to the new nickname, fame points have reached 100. Along with this, agility and endurance have also improved, and he attacked the monster in front of him. He fiercely fought off the young man, but Sid won. Mid-level monsters became mere trifles for the young man. It's only been a quarter of a day, and Sid has already failed 7. 2 weeks ago, although I could raise the level, but now the screen did not show any reaction. Perhaps it's time to leave this place, Sid thought, and decided to go to Grego's. He looked at the screen with his data and rejoiced. The attacking Volcador goes to the young man, but he fights him off, asking Silen how much longer. The girl behind him runs with a sword and pushing off from the guy attacks the Volcador. A comrade calls her and asks her not to move. His weapon is pointed in her direction. She asks him to wait, but next to her a bullet sweeps by, which strikes the Volcador behind. The man informs the girl that everything is ready. She sarcastically thanks Genos, that's her friend's name. Silen informs Karen that she can no longer hang around in this hole, as if asking a question. Then she points her finger to the side at another friend, and asks Karen, does he still believe in the words that they will get rich? Collected monster skins can already make them rich, and the question was whether someone would skin the monster again. Then Karen asked everyone to stop. Silen asked to admit the truth, there was nothing here that would bring them money except for the stinking skin, of course. Her friend began to bicker with her, because according to the information he heard, and Karen sighed again listening to their bickering. They're coming back. Because of this false information, they had already been on the verge of death several times. It was too dangerous here. Karen said that he would not change his decision. If a goth wanted to do something, he could do it alone. Genos told Goth that he agreed with Karen because it was too risky to act now. Goth was silent. They will have to go down as soon as it gets light. Sid sat by the fire and thought, thinking that being alone was a matter of course, because he had always lived like this. Therefore, I did not feel any loneliness. But after meeting Neil, everything changed. For the first time, she made Sid feel unbearably sad. If he returned to Avantes, the young man reasoned, the kingdom would definitely be shocked, since he had risen to the level of a thief. He was sure that after that they would treat him very differently, and those who despised him would not even be able to raise their heads. Sid would really like to see this, but in this case, he will have to live again as a puppet obeying orders. He remembered the words of Neil, who told the young man that he is capable of anything and can become anyone. Perhaps his real gift is free will. The next morning, Sid did not agree with Neil, because it was not yet clear to him who he would become. But he will definitely not do work for the state that abandoned him. Moreover, Spur's adopted daughter lives in Grego's, whom he asked to take care of. So there was only one thing left for him. Where was he supposed to go? Then a bullet shot past his head, interrupting his reasoning. The company was surprised to see Sid. It was a man, they thought. But what are other people doing here? Karen was berating Genos, who had just nearly killed an innocent guy. Genos apologized, thinking it was a monster. Silen, covering her mouth and nose with her hands, said that the young man stank. How could it smell so strong? Sid was in mild shock. Genos apologized to Sid, asking who he was, telling the young man that their company was from Grego's. Sid was surprised. Kark came out of the forest interrupting their conversation. He was the only one missing here. Did he hear Genos' shot? Karen commanded Goth and he immediately understood what to do. The encirclement and dissection attack was taken to Kark. It bound him and the team had 1 minute to get out of there. Karen asked if everyone had heard him and stared at Sid, who in turn was looking at the screen. Karen did not understand what was happening to the young man. Sid, who was looking at the screen, saw an inscription in front of him. It read, "A furious storm is one of the spells of the elements of the wind." Next to the owner of the skill, the wind begins to swirl, which then dissects an object that falls within a range of 5 to 15 meters. On someone whose defensive strength exceeds 50, this skill does not work. Karen shouted at Sid not to stand still. On the screen, in the materials of the 8th rank, there was information about the Furious Storm skill. The spell mechanism was loaded. Karen shouted to the young man. Could he hear him? Here the screen showed and read that the skill level was low, and in order to register a skill, you need to increase it. The young man looked at the screen in surprise and asked if he could register it. How is this possible? Magic was a feature of people, after all. Goth shouted to Karen that it was difficult for him to restrain himself and it was time for them to get out. Here Kark interrupted the action of Goth's attack. The girl rushed to save her comrade, who was standing right in front of Kark. The young man began to run away, and the girl remained under the blow of the Kark. Shouting the name of Genos, he immediately shot at the monkey and commanded Karen, now. Karen ran up to Scylla and helping the girl was ready to attack against the monster. Genos asked Karen what they had to do, because it seems they angered Kark. Did Karen feel it? He replied that if they turned their backs on Kark, they were finished. What should they do now? Scylla pleaded. Prepare for battle, Karen said. Goth replied that he was not going to die here. Scylla tried to shut the young man up, because it was his idea to come here, and they started bickering again. Sid looked at them, sighing. What was the best thing for him to do? If he helps them, Avantes may find out that he is alive. Then he will have problems, but if they all die, he will not know how to get to Gregos. Karen ordered everyone to take positions. Goth began to wail that they would all die here, and Scylla tried to calm him down, because these words did not make anyone feel better. Goth continued to bend his line and asked the guys to try to escape at least now. But it was too late. Sid came out in front of their entire team, and Karen decided that he was crazy. Sid told everyone else that he had one request. Don't tell anyone what they're about to see. Everyone was surprised by his request. Sid went to attack Kark, and using his crash skill, he hit Kark. Scylla had no words. Did her eyes not deceive her? The girl thought aloud. Karen immediately began to ask a question to Genos, and the latter, without listening to him, immediately confirmed the guesses. There was a knight in front of them. Night came and the whole team sat around the campfire. Genos thanked Sid for saving their lives, but they still didn't know his name. The young man introduced himself. Then Genos asked where he was from. Karen immediately interrupted the hesitating Sid. It seems that Sid had some circumstances, Karen said to the young man. He cannot voice them if he does not want to. Scylla immediately asked how old Sid was. The young man did not understand why she asked him about such a thing. Scylla replied that the young man looked about 20 years old, but continued to talk to them on you, and this really infuriated her. Karen tried to stop her. For homunculi, age is unimportant, so they are not particularly versed in familiar and polite communication, Scylla Genos explained. And I asked Scylla not to be angry. Sid, embarrassed, wanted to ask something, namely, why these guys were here. Goth started saying that it all started with a joke by a knight, walking along with his companion. That knight said, there is a dungeon on Cloud Ridge where wealth is hidden. At first, their conversation seemed like a simple myth to Goth, but that knight talked about the dungeon in such detail. So Goth immediately after that began collecting various rumors and looking for materials about Cloud Ridge. And then I became convinced that the dungeon really exists. He was a little worried about the bad reputation of this place, but he was absolutely sure that the dungeon was located somewhere near Gregos, on a spur of the mountain. So then Sid interrupted his story and asked about the dungeon. Goth said that this is something like a laboratory or a repository created in ancient times. Of course it is impossible to say with certainty about its contents, but basically there should be various utilities for knights, starting with Ridergood. Various treasures, ancient weapons with protection. Sid thought to himself about a weapon with protection, and then he turned to Goth, clarifying his name. Goth responded positively and Sid asked him to tell him more about this very dungeon. Scylla was surprised. Did Sid really believe such nonsense? And clutching her head, the girl thought that this time their journey was definitely cursed. What two idiots were next to her? Genos told the young man that what they were looking for was something special. Otherwise, why, in his opinion, was the research of the dungeons carried out at the national level? There was only one reason, because of the level of danger. Of course, when it came to dungeons, you can't do without adventures, but even if you survive all the difficulties, the chance of success is only 1%. Sid was interested in Genos. If he knew about it, then why did he decide to participate? Genos replied to the young man that they were all greedy for money. Like many other adventurers who disappear while wandering in search of dungeons, they were also the same as these guys. Karen told Sid that, looking at the young man, it seemed that he was very interested in dungeons. But how should I say, they decided to end their search on this and return to grottos, Karen said. Scylla believed that this was the first correct decision since then, although it's her fault that she lost all her equipment at the wrong time. Karen asked the girl to stop blaming herself, as if they had worked in vain for the first time, getting incorrect information. What about Sid? Would he go alone to search for the Cloud Ridge dungeon? Genos asked him. Sid said that if his new comrades don't mind, then he would like to go with them. Genos asked the young man to clarify. Did he want to go to grottos with them? He had helped them after all, so Genos didn't mind. Silen wanted to know something from Sid. Why is he hiding his true identity? Sid was silent. If he didn't want to answer, then why would he go to Gregos? Silen asked again. Sid didn't say anything. Then the girl asked where their new friend was from. Karen asked the girl to stop. The shortest road will take 3 days. The team will have time to talk more, so we received an offer to get to know each other slowly. And now it's already dark, so you can relax. Who will be on the night watch? Goth volunteered. Well, everyone was hoping for Goth, and if something happened, the guys asked him to wake them up right away. It was night, and Sid couldn't sleep. He was thinking about people who had searched for a dungeon and failed or died altogether. The only ones who have succeeded are a group of researchers who received help from the kingdom. But even they sacrificed the lives of many comrades. Obviously, it was stupid for Sid to go on a search right now. A hall. A gathering of people in raincoats, one of whom was asking about someone who was going to be late for their meeting today. If she is late, then the audience was going to start without her. Someone in a raincoat was addressing another in a raincoat, because new information had arrived, which he had heard about. Yes, the information has been received, but so far this information has been unverified. Why? Another man in a raincoat asked, was Your Excellency embarrassed by something? As I said, the information was received, but they could not trust it. Were they sure that they were talking about a place located in the new Reitergrad? This has not been tested either. Then what was checked at all? One of the audience was indignant. What kind of place? What's inside? They didn't know anything for sure at all. But we are only sure that we are talking about something ancient. They didn't know the exact location, but they understood the approximate location. Yes, the location was roughly known, but the search area was too extensive. They lacked enough information to narrow it down. Where was this approximate location? Sid opened his eyes. Someone was already scolding Goth in the morning. Silen swore at Goth, because she never thought that he would be able to do this to them. Genos was also very surprised by his action. Sid didn't understand what had happened and asked the guys. Goth, while they were sleeping, took all the necessary items, food, and left. Genos knew that Goth was selfish, but he didn't think that he could just set them up. Karen was optimistic and informed everyone that there was nothing to be done about it, and they had to hurry off with what they had left. It seems that he knew the way, so if they don't get lost, they can safely arrive at the place with what they had. And they ran on their way. Then Genos fell down and apologized to the guys for not being as young as before. Karen asked him not to apologize, because he was tired too and was already thinking about stopping. Everything is fine. Silen said that thanks to Goth's escape, they had greatly accelerated. There was less luggage and it became easier to walk. The strange thing was that they did not catch up with the Goth. Apparently he ran so that his heels only sparkled. Karen, after Silen's words, believed that she was just something. Genos also confirmed Karen again, because Silen always had something to say. Then Sid moved away from the team a little and found their supplies hidden in a backpack. Why were they here? Scattered sandwich crumbs, and Silen followed the tracks. Then she called Karen in horror. There was a Goth hanging on a tree. It was Goth, wasn't it? Silen wondered. Karen could not believe his eyes and headed for the tree, but the girl stopped him. Yes, even though they parted on a bad note. But he was their comrade. They walked side by side for many years. Could they have left him to die? Silen was silent. Then, through her teeth, she said that the Goth was already dead. How was she supposed to know that? Sid interrupted their exchange and told everyone to stand, because he felt something and asked everyone not to move. Sid was too attentive. A voice came from somewhere. Karen tried to understand where it was coming from and asked the speaker to show himself. Then a figure appeared on the tree next to Goth. How self-confident, she kept saying. But he, speaking of Goth, was ready to sell your lives just to save his own skin. It wasn't a man. Genos started aiming at him, but then a new acquaintance came down from the tree. He was in a suit and mask. When he approached Sid, he immediately realized that he was a knight. Looking at Sid, someone thought that he was exactly D rank, and some strange feeling. Sid's body seemed to be reacting to something. In any case, someone was glad to meet, and introduced himself as Papet, a knight of Ranka from Malantor. Sid was thinking that he definitely could not defeat this knight. Only Papet wanted to know the young man's name, as Genos pointed his gun at him, saying that this guy wanted to kill them all. And Genos shot at Papet, telling his comrades that he would try to buy some time. But the bullet froze in the air next to the knight, and he threw it towards Genos, hitting him. Karen and Silen were terrified. If they squeak any more, Papet threatened to kill them, and offered to continue the conversation with Sid. What was the young man's name? He asked. But Sid, instead of answering, attacked Pappet with his sword. He managed to dodge. Sid asked Karen to listen to him carefully because there would be no other chance. So he had to not slow down and run away from here with Sillon. He had to save Silemus. And they ran, and Sid remained alone with the knight. But then the knight saw a familiar sword in Sid's hands, with which he attacked him. But Pappet famously dodged Sid's punches, and knocking the sword out of his hands, he grabbed the young man by the throat, asking him a logical question about where did Sid get this sword from. Sid thought to himself that it was the Sword of Radiance. If Sid does not answer, then he will die, the knight said. Sid said it was a gift. The question immediately arose, from whom? Sid replied that it was from a friend. From which friend? The support asked. And then another voice rang out that it was a gift from him, and calling him a bastard, Karen hit the knight on the back with a sword. After that, he was left without a hand. Sillon looked at Karen, who was in pain, and he was angry at her for coming back, because he told her to get out of here. But the girl could not leave Karen. Karen was talking about Genos, who died. He was obliged to give a thrashing to this bastard who killed their comrade. Pappet called Karen a brat, decided that first he would have to clean up the garbage, and I asked Sid who he wanted to choose first. These were his friends, so it was up to him to decide. He had to choose who Pappet would kill, a guy or a girl. Sid sent Pappet attacking him with his smash skill. Pappet flew off to the side, and Sid was trying to catch his breath. Taking the sword, he ran to Karen and Sillon, who were not far from him. Sid asked Sillon if she was injured and if she was okay. But Sillon was worried not for herself, but for Karen, who was lying on the ground. Karen's condition was deplorable, because the wound was serious, but fortunately Karen was alive. If they delayed, the situation would worsen, so it was necessary to get Karen out of here as soon as possible. Sillon asked Sid to wait, looking at Genos. What about him? They couldn't just leave him here. But then suddenly the trees began to take off together with the roots into the air, and Pappet with them. Pappet attacked Sid and his friends with trees that were in the air. The comrades all ran away together. The young man was late. Pappet attacked them. Lying on the ground, Sid covered Karen's body with his own. He barely made it. Karen was still breathing. But Sillon was injured. She was pierced by a tree, and she begged Sid to help her. It hurt her. But Sid, without having time to do anything, saw Sillon stretching her arms to him, go limp. Pappet explained to the young man that he did not understand who he was contacting. He made him very angry. If he stops infuriating and answers all the questions that Pappet asked him, then he will kill him quickly and painlessly. Who was he and where was he from? Pappet asked again. What's the boy's name? Sid, angry and calling the knight a scumbag, made it clear that he was not going to tell anything. Pappet was sorry, why bother him? And attacking Sid offered him to die. The reaction from the vibration sensor. The emergency response system has been activated. Sid didn't understand what was going on, and neither did Pappet. Then the ground opened up under the Pappet and, destroying the trees, attacked the knight himself. The young man woke up in some strange place and thought to himself that he was still alive. How did he manage to survive? A screen appeared in front of him, which reported that the young man had discovered a hidden dungeon. A dungeon. The system of the fourth bunker is reactivated. Enter the administrator name. Sid heard the previously familiar voice again before the ground opened up. It was the same female voice. He saw Killen and Karen and ran towards them. Both of them had significant blood loss. Sillon was still alive, but Karen was in much worse condition. The system kept asking me to enter the administrator's name, and Sid got tired of it. So he started shouting so that she wouldn't repeat the same thing and it would be better to help him. Whoever she was. He asked to help his comrades, and his words echoed down the corridor. Here the system was talking about 2 patients who were found in critical condition. According to the protocol, an urgent treatment team was sent. Then little robots were coming at Sid. He didn't understand what it was. A screen appeared in front of him, which told about the golem's healers. It was a type of golem that possessed an ancient art. The skill is used for medical purposes as emergency care for the seriously injured. Golems, and grabbing his comrades, they carried them somewhere. Sid, who was looking at them, was thinking to himself whether he should follow them. The robot, who looked at him, made it clear to the young man that he could go. Pappet came to the blender. He replied to the knight that he had heard the news of his failure. Pappet replied that something unexpected happened in the middle of the battle. A successful search for writer goods is the most important part of the plan. Splendor answered him. A plan they had been working on for 40 years. If they do not collect the right amount of writer gudo, then it is unknown how much longer they will have to wait. Pappet replied that he knew everything. That's why he went there. If it wasn't so important, then Splendor would have sent Shadow. But Pappet said that something really inexplicable had happened, and Splendor asked me to tell you more. He hoped to hear a reason worthy of his understanding. and Pappet said that while he was studying the Cloud Ridge, he met one mortal. Interestingly, this mortal knew about the existence of the dungeon. Pappet became curious, so he asked him a little and found out that he was not alone and his companions also knew about the dungeon. And then it turned out that there was a knight among his comrades. Then Splendor got interested. Pappet couldn't really understand what his rank was, like D, well, at most C. But the main problem was that he had the sword Nile, the sword of radiance. Splendor asked. Yes, a sword that even Pappet couldn't touch without Neil's permission. And this sword was in the hands of this low-ranked knight. And what had Pappet done to him? Splendor wondered. Did he really kill her? About this, Pappet wanted to kill him. But the young man managed to escape and slip away. A knight of rank D was able to escape death and escape from Pappet. And taking off his hood, the blender approached the Pappet closely, asking if he was holding him for a fool. Pappet replied that he had no reason to lie to Blender. He hadn't seen the body anywhere, so he assumed Sid was still alive. Splendor decided to take Pappet's word for it and allowed him to go. Shadow would tell him about the new assignment. And Pappet left. Splendor sat thinking about the Sword of the Nile, deciding that he needed to find out more about it. Sid didn't believe what he saw. It couldn't be. Where were they from here? He thought. In front of him were 2 flasks with writer goods inside. How did he know about them? Well, that's natural, Sid replied. After all, he himself was created in one of these writer goods. The provision of emergency care to 2 seriously injured patients has been completed, a female voice said. Already, Sid was surprised. For more in-depth treatment, rights to use writer good are required. Administrator permission is required to activate writer good. Enter the administrator's name, the system required. Sid was thinking to himself on the rights to use. The administrator's name, he didn't know any of this. The system kept saying that it needed administrator permission. It needed to enter a name. Sid, enter the name Sid, the young man asked the system. There wasn't. Maybe there was a chance that it would work. The administrator's name was entered, the system said. Sid thought to himself what happened. All systems of the 4th bunker have been activated. All permissions of the 4th bunker have been granted to the Sid administrator, the system said. The young man began to look around and found a strange place in the bunker. The system reported that the young man was in a closed zone, from which control over all control and protection systems of the Ark's fins was carried out. Last Arch, Sid asked the system. Last Ark is the stronghold of the 4th bunker of the Herentera Empire. The bunkers of the superpower of the past. The Herenters were created during the war years, when the Empire was in danger of being defeated. This bunker is the last one preserved in the Ida mountain range. Ida Ridge, Sid asked. Now it is called the Cloud Ridge, the system replied. Did the young man want to know anything else? He thought about it. The robot in front of him stretched out to his height, and to continue, it was suggested to indicate an item on his screen that Sid would like to learn more about. View zones, residential area, warehouse area, training area, and production area. Sid decided to skip the living area and look at the warehouse. All the necessary items were stored in the warehouse area. The food products created there, materials for servicing all systems, as well as various weapons to protect the bunker are stored in the production area. Do they even bring food there? Sid asked. And the system suggested that he go to the grocery warehouse. Food supplies were stored here for the residents of Last Ark for 6 months. Did Sid want to inspect the grocery warehouse? The system asked. Sid asked to skip the meal and tell him what is located in other places. To the right of the materials warehouse is an armory. Weapons were collected there for the defenders defending the bunker. Sid asked me to stop. How much more time was needed for the treatment of Silan and Karen? The young man decided to find out. The total required time is 5 hours and 30 minutes, the system replied. The young man decided to check the system's name. His name was Roa, right. The system replied that the young man was right, and he asked if he could inspect the armory. When he came to the armory, he asked Roa to open the door for him. There was a huge robot in front of him, which scared Sid. What was it? He asked. The system replied that it was Saint Gigas, a battle golem created to protect Uinor, the capital of the Herentera Empire. An invaluable combat unit. The golem is 7 meters high, showed itself well in the Third Great War. In addition to this sample, 32 more golems were stored in the second warehouse. Sid was surprised that there were 32 more huge golems in stock. The robot showed that they should go. Sid hurried after him, thinking about what a wayward robot. They came to the armory and Sid's eyes lit up. It was the first time he had seen so many weapons. Blued armor appeared before his eyes. It was a unique item. These armors were once worn by the legendary hero Herentera Lachark, thanks to whom they were nicknamed the hero's armor. They had incredible durability, gave great protection and added strength to the owner. Change of indicators when wearing the kit. protection plus 210, physical strength plus 15. Sid asked to listen to him. The system obeyed. This armor, can he put it on? The equipment was on the young man. He put on armor. The golem that had accompanied him all the way to the dungeon was looking at Sid. He asked the robot if it suits him. It was a little unusual. Then he noticed a detail that he didn't understand how to use. He put on everything that was in the kit. This thing was tight to him. The system explained to the young man that it was thermal underwear made of nanofiber. Thermal underwear strengthens in response to incoming damage, strengthening the protection of the one who wears it. It can also stop blood loss by squeezing in the wound area. Maintains a constant body temperature in all weather conditions. Wearing it gave the young man plus 23 to protection. Cool, Sid liked it. Now it would be good to pick up a weapon that matches the armor. And then Sid saw the sword. A screen popped up in front of him, on which it was written Shockwave, a non-lethal weapon that uses sound waves to attack. The method of application is still unknown. The young man had no idea how to use this sword, and he asked Roa if he could advise him on a weapon. The young man believed that some kind of sword would be perfect for such armor. Then he saw a sword lying there. Wasn't it a special Udane sword? The screen wrote that it was a special Udane sword, a unique item, a sword made from the bone of a legendary dragon. Despite its size, it is extremely lightweight and durable, plus 800 attack power. The Udane sword is the second unique item stored here, along with the space armor. The sword is made according to sketches of a two-handed sword, but due to its weightlessness, it can be used with one hand. The attack power was lower than the Sword of Radiance that Sid was currently wielding. But with the incredible strength of this sword, it becomes possible to destroy the enemy's weapon with a high probability. Sid tried out the sword. Did Roa ask if he liked guns? Sid answered positively. Does the young man want to explore other places? No, Sid wanted to know how much time was left before his comrades woke up. There were 28 minutes left. He offered to go back to them, wanted to make sure they were okay. It will be done, Roa replied. Sid returned to his comrades, who were lying on their bunks. Karen's severed arm was restored, and there was no trace of Silen's wound. They had fully recovered. How was that even possible? Sid wondered. Sid asked the system if there would be any problems after such treatment. Will everything be like before with his friends? Roa replied that everything would be even better. Their skills would improve compared to the condition before treatment. Sid didn't understand, so Krone's arm didn't just grow back. To restore the bodies of these patients, materials used in the production of homunculi were used. Now the strength of his friends and speed significantly exceed the abilities of ordinary people, although they do not reach the high-class homunculi. Could the system have created a homunculus? Sid asked. The maximum capacity of this system is the synthesis of a living organism. But it will not be possible to create a living being with self-consciousness. However, it is possible to create an unlimited number of body parts. How much have Karen and Silen's abilities improved? After improving skills, Karen has a D rank, and Silen has an E rank. Rank D surprised Sid. However, their abilities are limited to recovered body parts, the system replied. Sid drooped and fell to his knees, thinking to himself about Karen, who had just been cured in Ridergood and had already received the rank of D. He was a knight. And even after so much training, he barely reached the D rank. And Sid asked the system if he could use Ridergood again, to which the system explained to the young man that the system can synthesize a homunculus only once. However, the homunculus can improve its skills and heal wounds in the Ridergood in which it was created. Sid didn't even know this, because Ridergoods are just written off after one use. At the first opportunity, the young man wanted to find the Ridergood in which he was created. Then Karen woke up, calling the young man. Not bad armor, he complimented, and is there any more of the same? Neil stood and waited for the appearance. Shadow appeared. Did he find what she asked for? Shadow replied that he had found footprints in the place indicated by the girl, but could not find him himself. Could he have left Cloud Ridge? Neil asked. Shadow said that here in the direction of the tracks, the young man was on his way to Greygo's. Greygo's? Neil wondered. But Sid's tracks ended in the forest. Apparently, a battle ensued. The attack was so intense that it affected the landscape of the entire neighborhood. Given the scale of the destruction, it's definitely some knight's ability, Shadow said. Neil ordered the search to continue. If Sid was alive, Shadow had to find him wherever the young man was. And if he was dead, she ordered to find at least his body. It will be done, Shadow said to his mistress, hiding. If not in Cloud Ridge, then where was Sid? Sid was standing in a dark cave. He couldn't protect anyone, even myself. He's just a defective piece of trash. Then he saw the thief. Spur was telling Sid that he would just die the same way he did, and ordered him to run. Then Sid woke up from his nightmare. What had just happened? Sid wondered aloud. Rower replied that the young man had a dream. Sid was surprised. The system said that he had just had a dream. Sid couldn't believe it. Homunculi don't have dreams, the young man said. That's right, Roa replied. Homunculi need sleep only to recover from injury or loss of strength, and they do not see dreams. What was happening to him, Sid thought. Roa apologized because she didn't have the information on the matter. Sid assured Roa that everything was fine and he was just talking to himself. In this case, did Sid wish to continue the examination? He was asking the system about the time that had passed since he arrived in last arc. Exactly a week has passed. So much had passed, Sid thought. There were so many amazing things here that he didn't keep track of the time at all. He had to finish exploring the surroundings. He was already getting bored with all this. Karen and Sillun fought against each other, training skills. After attacking each other in turn, Sillun knocked Karen down and asked when he would get used to the new hand. Karen replied that he had started treating her much better now than at the beginning. He needed to focus on training, because they couldn't stay in the dungeon forever. Karen understood Sillun. And I saw Sid. Sid was asking how the two of them were feeling. Karen had the best of all. Sillun was also fine. Sid was happy and decided to find out how the guys got a new weapon. Karen didn't know how to say it. After all, magic items were very different from ordinary weapons. Sillun was crazy about the new sword. Will you be able to complete the training in a couple of days? Sid asked. He thought that about then they would hit the road. Yes, quite, Karen replied, because he and Sillun also thought that they should move out in the next few days. Sid was delighted and wished them to do a good job in training. Sillun was surprised that Sid was going there again. Wasn't he tired of it yet? Karen replied that he didn't think Sid could get bored. This place was almost the same as where he was born. The young man asked Roa how they got here. Roa replied that 1 week, 1 hour and 25 minutes ago, strong vibrations created a crack in the ceiling of the complex. The system recognized the vibrations as an enemy attack and activated urgently. Mr. Sid and his 2 companions were here thanks to the security system. This happened before the system was activated, Sid asked. After all, they also did not receive any permission to enter, since they entered the bunker at the same time as the system was launched. A protection program was applied to them. A protection program? Sid asked. Yes, the system answered. It is programmed to grant rights to the administrator who first entered the last arc. Sid became the first creature to enter the territory of the last arch since its creation. Sid thought about how damn lucky they were. Could Roa tell who created this system? There is no exact answer in his system, but there is one message left by the last of the builders of this place. Sid told the system he wanted to listen. Here's his message. Roa, the voice said, surely they would have seen her for the first and last time if he had completed it a little earlier. Now only great luck will allow the survivors to get here and get shelter. There is no guarantee that there will be such survivors at all. They were facing one last war, even though they started it themselves. It is very sad. Harantura with its 1,000-year history has fallen under the onslaught of creatures that can hardly even be called people. But there was no way back, and the voice asked to pray for their return. Sid asked me to tell Roa about the last war that the man mentioned. Roa replied that he did not have the information to answer this question. Sid was surprised and asked about information about creatures that are even difficult to call people. But Roa again replied that he did not have the information to answer this question. Sid wondered aloud what kind of creatures they were that caused Harantura to fall. The system said that it was difficult to give an unambiguous answer to his question. Then the young man asked to give the answer that looked the most likely. Homunculi, the system replied.